When you think of power and control, what comes to mind? Probably something loud, maybe forceful, right? But what if I told you the most potent forms of power are completely invisible? Today, we're going to dive into the quiet psychology behind how influence really works.
So, let's ask the big question right up front. What does real power actually look like? Is it what we see in the movies, that obvious, in-your-face force? Or is it something way more subtle, something working just beneath the surface of our awareness?
Well, this is the big myth versus the reality. We're conditioned to think of power as this loud, aggressive thing, kind of like a roaring lion. But the truth is, real power is usually quiet. It's a subtle, psychological influence that can shape our decisions without us even noticing.
So where does this deep-seated need to control things even come from? You might think it comes from a place of strength, but it's actually the opposite. At its core, the drive to control is a survival strategy, and it's almost always rooted in fear.
This quote really hits the nail on the head. When people feel unsafe internally, they seek control externally. So it's not really about being the boss of the world outside, it's about trying to quiet down the chaos inside. That feeling of being unsafe, of not being grounded, is what drives that need to micromanage everything and everyone around us.
Okay, so what kind of fears are we talking about here? Well, it pretty much boils down to three big ones: a deep fear of uncertainty, a terror of chaos, and, of course, a fear of being vulnerable. Control becomes this tool we use to create an illusion of safety and stability in a world that, let's be honest, often feels pretty unpredictable.
So how does all that fear turn into real-world influence? This is where things get really fascinating. The most effective tools of power are the ones you can't even see. I mean, they don't feel like power at all. They just feel normal.
A fundamental tool is something called asymmetry. It sounds a little academic, but it's really just a power imbalance. You know, like in a job interview, the interviewer has more authority, more information, and that imbalance quietly shapes the entire dynamic, all without a single direct order ever being given.
And then you have emotional control. And wow, is this one potent? I mean, why would you ever use brute force when you can tap into someone's own emotions? By using things like guilt or shame or a deep, deep need for approval, you can influence people way more effectively because you're working on them from the inside out.
And then there's maybe the biggest tool of all, managing information. It's about controlling what people see and hear, because if you can control someone's perception, you basically control their reality. After all, we can only make decisions based on what we believe to be true.
In all of this, it leads to the holy grail of control. Because the most efficient form of power isn't the kind you have to constantly enforce. No, it's the kind where people start to enforce the rules on themselves.
So how does this actually work? Well, it's a pretty clear process, really. First, you introduce some rules and social norms. Then, you repeat them over and over until they just feel normal, because familiarity feels like truth. Next, you link those beliefs to a person's very identity. Suddenly, questioning the rule feels like questioning who you are. And the result? People start to police themselves. The whole system just runs on its own. Okay, but this whole system, it doesn't come for free. There's always a hidden cost, a psychological price to pay. And it reshapes everyone involved in the dynamic, not just the person on the receiving end.
So if you're the one being controlled, you're faced with this really tough choice, right? You can resist, but that feels super risky. It could threaten your job, your relationships, your sense of belonging. So the much more common path is to adapt. It feels safer in the moment, but over time, it leads to normalizing things that make you uncomfortable, and you slowly start to lose trust in your own gut feelings.
And this really breaks down how that damage isn't just a one-way street. The person being controlled, yeah, they end up with damaged self-trust, a lot of resentment, maybe even passivity. But look at the controller. They're not exactly living a stress-free life. They're dealing with constant tension, their own inner instability, and this nagging fear of losing that control they've worked so hard to build. Nobody wins here.
And that's why this quote is so on point. Trust grows where control decreases. You just can't have both. They're like oil and water. Forcing someone to obey you isn't the same as earning their loyalty. And just because someone is silent doesn't mean they agree with you. Real connection, real trust, that can only blossom when the need for control finally takes a step back.
So, if trying to control everything and everyone on the outside is so draining and destructive, what's the real answer? Well, it's about completely redefining what we think of as power. It's not about mastering others, it's about mastering yourself. And here it is, the big side-by-side. On one hand, you've got this idea of false power. That's all about controlling others, being rigid, domination. But on the other hand, you have true power, and that's about controlling yourself. It comes from self-awareness, from emotional stability. That's the secret to having influence without having to resort to force.
So, what is this real psychological strength? It's pretty simple, actually, but not easy. It's the ability to just be okay with uncertainty, to sit with it, and not have to immediately rush in and control it. It means you can be around different opinions and new situations without feeling threatened. And that inner stability is what lets you lead without dominating and influence without manipulating.
And this final idea really ties everything we've talked about together. Real power does not come from dominating the world. It comes from not being dominated by fear. See, the ultimate battle isn't with the world outside of you. It's winning the battle with yourself.
So, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Now that you can spot some of these quiet signs, take a look around. Where does this dynamic of control, whether it's you doing it or you experiencing it, show up in your own life?